The Chinese Communist Party has probably surpassed us in overall power. The more subtle thing is, and it is the common thread to all of these, is the United States has been complacent, sort of willfully complacent and now negligent in addressing these problems. The good news is that a number of policymakers, not just in Washington, but across the country, have realized this is a problem. And at Heritage, we are hopeful about turning the corner and making sure that we surpass the Chinese once again. We've got a lot of work to do, though.
Welcome back to the Kevin Roberts Show. I'm Larry O'Connor, and this week we continue our conversation about China, but we're going to shift the focus from the digital battlefield to, well, a more tangible battlefield, the military battlefield. We're talking about China's unbelievable military buildup, their physical presence around the world and in our own country, and really threats to our own national sovereignty. China's got a huge military huge buildup in their navy and the number of submarines. We know that. We've got Chinese nationals studying here in American institutions, and there's a quiet but growing issue of Chinese land acquisitions, a lot of that land acquisition near U.S. military bases. Kevin Roberts, of course, is with us here. And Kevin, these feel like a collection of very different stories, but they all sort of have a common theme. It's really one big issue, isn't it?
It is one big issue, and to state the obvious, but then a more subtle point, the obvious is the Chinese Communist Party has probably surpassed us in overall power. Maybe that's not quite true, but it's a question. I don't celebrate that, obviously. I lament stating what I think is the truth, but it's fairly obvious that's underway. The more subtle thing is, and it is the common thread to all of these, is the United States has been complacent, sort of willfully complacent and now negligent in addressing these problems. The good news is that a number of policymakers, not just in Washington, but across the country, and state legislatures in particular, have realized this is a problem. And at Heritage, we are hopeful about turning the corner and making sure that we surpass the Chinese once again. We've got a lot of work to do, though, in order to do it.
Okay. Well, listen, over the course of this episode, we're going to lay out what the problem is and then what the solutions could be. But let's start with one fundamental question here, because you hear a lot of weasel words in Washington with regard to China. There are competitor, there are adversary, there are rival. Kevin Roberts, is China our enemy?
Yes, enemy is the right word. And a lot of the words that are bandied about in Washington, even I sometimes use the word adversary, which is a softer version of enemy, falls short of hitting the mark. And so I'm just going to ascribe the benefit of the doubt even to people in Washington, Larry, and say maybe they haven't caught up with reality. They are our enemy. And I think when we use that word enemy, we also make a really important distinction that our enemy is the Chinese Communist Party. We look forward to a day when the beautiful country of China, with all of those billions of beautiful Chinese people, are governed by something that is a government that's more free.
That's right. Yeah. And so let's talk about their military buildup then. We know they've been building up their military. They've had a formidable, in terms of size and scale, for quite some time, not just the troops that they have at their disposal, but also their armaments. But have they modernized? There was a time there where I think military experts in DC would say, well, yeah, they've got a lot of toys, but they're nothing like the capabilities of our toys. How have they done in terms of the technological and modernization aspects of their military?
Well, they've made dramatic improvements, and to say the least. And certainly our military leaders a generation ago were accurate when they said that, yes, while the Chinese, of course, have more people, they potentially have a higher manufacturing capacity. What they will be manufacturing in terms of instruments of war simply will be almost incompetent as it relates to the American military. Well, two things have happened. Number one, the Chinese have seen generational advances in military technology, a lot of it acquired through espionage and intellectual property theft of Americans and American companies. But the second thing that's happened, which has really aggravated that trend, which would be troubling enough, is that while there continues to be good, if not great, innovation in the American defense industry, there are some intrinsic obstacles to that innovation hitting a broad scale. One of them, we've touched upon this in other episodes, is just the procurement industry, the process by which some of that new technology can be introduced into the Department of War's budget. Those two things, the advancement in technology in China and the difficulty of getting all of that advanced technology into military contracts in the Department of War, have really compounded the problem for American national security.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, we had an episode where we specifically talked about Heritage's index of U.S. military strength and some of the readiness problems that we have and challenges that we have right now. And you said, listen, there's some good signs right now, and we seem to be moving in a good direction. But with regard to China's buildup here, I mean, why else would they be building up, Dr. Roberts, in the scale that they are and with the specific kinds of weapons that they're looking at right now, if it isn't to prepare for an eventual showdown with us?
That's definitely the overriding purpose. If I were forced to come up with another motivation, and it is at least partially true with the Chinese, it would be a version of an industrial policy. It's a way of employing what has become a disproportionately male
Oh,
population, and some
it's a
women. But
jobs program. They always
yeah,
have a jobs program,
and
these
and
Marxists.
when the first years that everyday Americans saw, it's like 15 years ago, wow, the Chinese they're building a lot of seemingly more advanced military products. There were some, I think, legitimate analyses that this is a jobs program. Well, we now realize it is to defeat the United States if they can. And look, keep in mind how Chinese culture, something Chinese culture honors, and that is the long game, much more than we in the West, especially we impatient Americans, can honor. And so it may be that the real purpose of this buildup isn't even to have an outright conflict with the United States, although they're now very well prepared for it, but to show us that we probably shouldn't even try to keep up because of the advances that they've made in their technology and also their economy.
Wow. So they've got ships, they've got missiles, they've got submarines, they've got planes, but they also haven't been very secret about their military doctrine and how they approach us as their adversary or enemy. I mean, this is an open secret. Everyone at the Pentagon and in Washington, they know that China's gunning for us, right? Why don't we talk about it more?
Well, thankfully, we're talking about it more than we did, say, 4 or 5 years ago, but we're still not talking about it enough. And look, one of the reasons for that is just put aside what might be differences of opinion Americans have about what a priority Ukraine is or isn't. The presence of that war in Europe, whatever someone thinks about how you solve it, of course, has been an aggravating factor when it comes to doing what Heritage colleagues and I believe any administration should do, which is to place a premium on the Pacific theater. Now, along the way, we have this other seemingly disparate, but as I will explain, very related introduction of a new dynamic, and that is Monroe Doctrine 2.0. The
Mm,
emphasis of the Trump Vance administration on our own backyard, Latin America, is important in and of itself. That is, for Latin America, we're already beginning to see the fruits of that. But it also is part of sending a signal to the Chinese that while we are ramping up our military production, which we must do, while we are making more efficient our procurement procedures so that that new technology can be introduced in the Department of War, we are going to begin shoving you out of an arena where you never should have been allowed. And that is a really good sign we're very optimistic about.
All right, two arguments I hear about the military threat of China that I want to bounce off you. You go ahead and tell me what the answer is. The first one is we're America, man. We already outspend everybody combined. We can already outgun everybody. We've seen our military might in the bombing run in Iran and the operation in Venezuela. No one's gonna mess with us. Are they just whistling past the graveyard with that complacency?
Yeah, with each passing year, I myself and my colleagues at Heritage believe they're whistling past the graveyard. And so we were inspired to see what reality was or what we think reality would be. And so we put together this little project called Tidal Wave. It's basically a sophisticated war game using artificial intelligence, 5,000 footnotes. And The bottom line is, while the United States might prevail in an outright conflict with the Chinese, the chances are we would not. And this is
Oof.
seemingly such an accurate, realistic depiction of what the situation is now that the Trump administration asked us to redact a few portions of it because we were, pardon the pun, so over the target. And so our
Yikes.
interest, of course, is always to convey what we discover to be reality, but it's also in our national security interest. That's a way of saying our policymakers in Congress have to do one thing that's really important: stop spending money on munitions programs for wars of the 1980s and 90s and start building a really modern American military.
All right. The other argument I hear might even be more insidious, and that is, listen, we do a lot of business with China. They need our companies because we're building so much over there. We're the major part of their economy. They hold a bunch of our debt over there. And the last thing they're going to do is mess up business as usual and do anything stupid with us. So, everything's fine. It's like another Cold War. Yeah, we've got a military buildup, but as long as we're still in business with them, everything's going to be fine.
We used to think that that was a very convincing case. It's certainly a legitimate one and a well-intentioned one. But if that were really true, if that were the operating thesis of the Chinese, then it would seem that it would also be true that when President Trump initiated tariffs on China, that the Chinese would have folded, right? And you know that not only did they not fold, they've been the most difficult negotiating partner. And you know why? Because they believe increasingly that they can exist without those still important economic partnerships with certain American companies and industries. That's why at Heritage we've been arguing since the spring of 2023 in this great research product we call A New Cold War with China, that it would be wise, it would be prudent for American business owners to be looking for ways to ramp down their involvement, ramp down their production in China. Some people like to use the verb decoupling. I think if we had a magic wand at Heritage, that's what we would implement, but very much to the, I think, well intentioned heart of that question, which is the importance of economic partnerships. There's going to have to be at least a modest change so that we protect American economic interests as well. The Chinese are ready to fight us, not just in terms of military, but also in terms of their economic strength.
All right, let's get into the historical nuggets here. What can we learn from history here in terms of our military readiness and not recognizing who our real adversaries are overseas?
One of the reasons our founders created a republic as opposed to another form of government was to make sure that it could, through its freedom, and they were convinced that free enterprise would reign supreme, ramp up its military might when needed, but also would keep a very small standing army and navy. We've changed that a little bit. You think about Eisenhower's comment about a military industrial complex. Although I think under the two Trump terms, we've largely gotten that back into balance in ways that square with the founding. The reason that I start with that explanation, Larry, is for this point. We don't ever want to have, I don't think, in a republic, if we could even afford to do this financially with our federal budget, this massive buildup for a long duration, because ultimately you start eating away at the popular will for such a thing. But when there is a really clear enemy, when there is a really clear threat, particularly one that at the very least is challenging us across the board militarily and has surpassed us in naval power, then it is time to ramp up. And I think that it's
Yeah.
incumbent upon our policymakers, both Republicans and Democrats, and I'll come back to why I say that, to really be in favor of this. It's important that the Chinese Communist Party see this as a bipartisan effort. Otherwise, their ability to manipulate public opinion in the United States will be used against us.
Uh, so it seems to me that there's a whole lot more going on here as I set this up, and it's bizarre to have these conversations that we're all of our corporations are building things over there, high tech stuff over there. Our entertainment companies are like pandering to the Chinese audience when we make our movies and all of this stuff, and yet we're fully aware that they're ramping up their military. They're building a military that will challenge us on the world stage, and yet at the same time we're welcoming with open arms thousands and thousands of students all in our STEM programs in American universities in science and technology and engineering to learn from our schools. And again, they don't come here unless they get the blessing, permission, and encouragement, if not full participation, with the very Chinese Communist government that is our enemy. What are we doing?
We're committing civilizational suicide. I mean,
Sorry, that was
it's
a
insane.
long question for you. I'm
No,
sorry for building it up so big.
it required that crescendo because it's so absurd. And just to give you our policy solution, at least temporarily, we believe that the admission of Chinese-born students to American universities ought to be suspended completely, categorically. Doesn't mean forever, but until and unless we can get to the bottom of some very serious cases of espionage at some of our most elite research universities, and these involve Chinese nationals, until and unless American universities can show they actually care more about the United States than they do their bottom line, which is aided by these international tuition being paid. I think that this is important. And it also has an additional benefit for those of us who are education reformers, which is it puts the squeeze on institutions, these universities that have been, I think, indoctrinating students against American values. I think it's you sort of kill three birds with one stone.
Yeah. I,
That's not
I've read.
popular among
No, no.
American university presidents.
Well, no, because at the universities they want academic openness, and they want. And by the way, it's also not popular with university presidents because those students that are coming from China pay full tuition plus. This is a big money making scheme for them. But the fact is, when they come and they work in these STEM fields or they learn in these STEM fields, they are learning the skills that are directly related to the weapon systems and technology that they will use against us. And you've documented at Daily Signal, I've read the stories about legitimate, verifiable Chinese espionage. These are not our friends.
No, they're not our friends, and we have to accept that, and our federal policy has
Yeah.
to reflect it. And so we just encourage the administration to be even more stringent than they have been.
Yeah, the universities will also say, obviously, academic openness. We want, and of course, they'll raise the big, the X word, xenophobic. How dare you? Just because they're from China, just because they're Chinese nationals, doesn't mean they're our enemy. But there is a direct through line, isn't there, for the people who do get the permission? A lot of them are connected to the party apparatus.
Yeah, this is not about their culture, which is what the etymology of xenophobia refers to. It's about their connection to the Chinese Communist Party, which is our enemy. And so, until and unless the Chinese Communist Party ceases to rule China as a totalitarian regime, then I think we need to be open to this just categorical shutting off of the spigot. And look, the other thing is it's connected to conversations we have at Heritage about why we have so many American men of working age, able-bodied, who aren't going to college, who aren't looking for jobs. This seems far afield, but it's connected. We have sort of adopted this soft bigotry against American born students, men and women of all ethnic backgrounds, but native born students, that they're somehow incapable of these STEM fields. That is obnoxious. It's grotesque. It's absurd. It's anti American. This policy we've proposed on shutting off the spigot of Chinese born university students actually aids us in improving education among our own people. There's nothing wrong with that.
By the way, it should also be noted that a lot of the men and women American born students who want to get into these programs, they're denied entry because they've opened up the admissions from Chinese born nationals. And a lot of those American kids are actually of Asian descent.
Yes.
Their parents are maybe third generation Chinese. So it's actually Chinese Americans ethnically, racially, who are being discriminated against to accommodate the Chinese nationals. It's Looney Tunes.
Yeah, it's at some point, in addition to the gains that the Chinese government has made in technology and economically, we have to understand that our own really misguided policies, even if they were well intentioned, we know in a nation of tolerance and so on, we realize that at this point make no sense because of the threat that the CCP poses.
And now let's get into the very real threat to American sovereignty here with regard to property ownership, land ownership in this country. There seems to be a concerted, systematic plan here from the Chinese government to acquire American property and American land. I know that there's a lot of research at Heritage and reporting at Daily Signal about it. What do we know about this?
We know that it's much more extensive than most Americans realize. And this news story usually pops in the spring of each year because there is thankfully a state legislature or five or 10 who get pressure from their people. This is all across the country, but especially in the South and the Rocky Mountain West, about a bill which Heritage is always happy to help draft and promote in the legislature, which bans the ownership of land by the Chinese Communist Party, especially if it's close to a military base. But let me just be really clear, really clear. If Heritage had a magic wand, we would ban land ownership, period, of any kind by the Chinese Communist Party or any entity associated with it. The reason that this has been allowed to happen is because we honor private property so much, not just the
Yeah.
the right of an entity or a person to buy it, but also from the standpoint of the seller. We just think that while that is a good, obviously we want to protect, there's an even higher good, which is American sovereignty and national security, both of which are threatened by the expansion of power of the CCP.
By the way, Kevin, if you and I wanted to pool our money and maybe get some other investors, we wanted to buy a few acres of Chinese land. How would that go over? We are we allowed to own land in China? You
Yeah,
think?
I'll volunteer you to take that plane trip and make that pitch.
I don't think it'll end well
Wouldn't
for
go well.
me. Well,
Actually,
listen, as
I
we
wouldn't
like to
volunteer you. I like you too much to say that.
thank you, I appreciate that. I while we like to shoot everything this year through the lens of our 250th founding here in this great 2026 celebration, what would our founders say? Because they valued property rights. I mean, it was one of the most fundamental rights that they enjoyed when they came to the colonies here that they didn't have back in the old world. Owning your own land and being able to do with it and having your own personal sovereignty over that land, it's a fundamental American principle. What would they think, though, about foreign countries owning land here, especially a foreign adversary?
Every single one of them to the person would think we're crazy. And even the most libertarian leaning of them, say someone like Thomas Jefferson, maybe even George Mason, kind of considered the godfather of American libertarianism, would say, this is insanity. And
Yeah.
and they would be right. And in fact, that would be the consensus of American political leaders in each successive generation until the generation now. And so this is why at Heritage, we want to amplify the good instincts and the policy proposals of so many members of our US House and US Senate to make sure that we can connect those with the good instincts of the Trump administration. In other words, Larry, that's a way of saying we've got a window of opportunity to address this problem. It's vital that we do that. We believe at Heritage we're beginning to see American military production ramp up. I think the American economy is on the brink of a boom. The last thing we've got to get straight is the political will to make some what ought to be easy decisions on behalf of Americans that prioritize Americans rather than the CCP.
One other question on this land ownership question. You just mentioned that states around the early part of the year during their legislative sessions proposed state laws about this. Is it time for a federal law on this issue?
Absolutely, and Heritage is ready to promote that every minute of every day of the week. In essence, this is a civilizational threat to us, and if you just go to any relatively normal part of America, which would be most of it, except parts of the two coasts, and you say, "Is this a good idea?" It's the response is not going to be framed in Republican or Democrat terms. It's going to be framed in American terms, which is exactly how it should be. Our politicians in Washington need to listen to common sense Americans, not to lobbyists on K Street.
So let's just to reset here, because I know that there are people watching this say, "How dare you say China's our enemies?" And I get my iPhone from China, and I love my TikTok and all that stuff. They're going through an accelerated military buildup that is designed, like from top to bottom, to be able to defeat us internationally. They are sending thousands and thousands of students to our universities to learn technologies that they can apply to the weapon systems when they go home. And many of them have been arrested and convicted of espionage. And finally, they're buying up land, a whole lot of land in this country near our military bases. I mean, if you don't think that's acting like an enemy, go ahead and let us know in the comments section. Love to hear what you think all those behaviors are, but it sure doesn't seem like a friendly sort of gesture to me. We will leave it there for this episode. Dr. Kevin Roberts, thank you so much. This isn't about fear. This isn't about running scared. This isn't about xenophobia or anything like that. It's about being realistic and recognizing who our enemies are on the world stage, and then protecting our nation, our freedoms, and our sovereignty from that very real enemy. As America approaches 250 years, defending that sovereignty means being smart, having your eyes wide open, and defending with our military strength those very freedoms that we've always held so dear. Next week, we continue our focus on China. We'll discuss the very important energy, mineral policies, and the geopolitics of natural resources. That's going to be a good one. We'll see you then. It's the Kevin Roberts Show.